Being a CISO has never been easy, and 2025 doesn't promise to make it any easier. What you need to know to begin and succeed in the job. Today, on the CyberWatch Expert Series. Hello, and welcome to the CyberWatch Expert Series. I'm your host, Curtis Franklin. And today, I'm talking with Ricoh Danielson. Ricoh is the CISO at Virtix Healthcare. He has a wealth of experience as a CISO, as a security expert, and as someone in high demand around the world for his knowledge of risk and cybersecurity. Today, our conversation touches on what the job of CISO is in 2025, what you need to know if you're moving into the role, and most important, what you need to know to succeed as a CISO this year and for the coming years. Now, let's get on to my conversation with Ricoh Danielson. We welcome to the podcast Ricoh Danielson. Ricoh, welcome to the CyberWatch Expert Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here with you guys and do some amazing things.
Well, we appreciate all of that. We want to get started. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us, what you're doing now and kind of the road that led you there.
Yeah, so right now I am a CISO and also a ransom negotiator as well for specific incident response and digital forensics. So I have my hat on multiple different things, not only from the executive level, but from the technical level, right? And the way we got here is a very long, tedious road, right? Being in the Army Combat Arms, I went overseas on 9 rotations, not only for the military, but different organizations and agencies and stuff like that on different PMCs, private military contracts. And also paramilitary contracts, doing the good work that nobody wants to do, right? In the countries nobody wants to go to. After that, I went to law school and then was doing that, and then finished out that, and then got into digital forensics for criminal and civil cases. Got some pretty big cases underneath my belt, and then from there just started gravitating more so from traditional digital forensics to incident response forensics, and then driving to boats for different organizations.
Well, it sounds like an amazing road and great, certainly great preparation for where you are now, and we're pleased to have you with us.
Thank you.
Wanted to begin, we're going to be talking a lot about your role as a CISO.
Mm-hmm.
And first, can you tell us a little bit about what that role entails in your case?
Yep. So this is my 6th time being a CISO, right? And predominantly a lot of my businesses that I've been a CISO for are healthcare organizations or hospitals, or clinical, or some of them matter, medical, IoT, and whatnot. This specific go around is very interesting. We started over 5 years ago, and we knew we were going to be the champion leader in the medical chart retrieving space, and driving it from a startup all the way now to a growth CISO on the merger and acquisition venture capital side. So we're actually going out and buying different organizations. So being in a different seat at any given time, because I call it the top 5 CISOs, right? You have startup, operational, transitional, and so on and so on. And I find myself actually living in the multiple areas of being these different categories of CISO, like all the way to startups, all the way to operational, compliance, all the way to sustainment and innovational now, because we always want to grow. Prior to that, I was being a VCISO for other hospitals, medical reimbursement companies as well. So I understand the space very, very affluently, and the same aspect from a technical and a high level perspective, and just marrying those, I think creates a really good CISO, to be honest with you.
You talked about the different CISOs, the 5 different CISOs. Now, a lot of people would have the idea that to a great extent, I mean, a CISO is a CISO is a CISO, but are there significant differences in the role as they evolve from one stage of the organization to another?
Yes. So a startup CISO is I love being a startup CISO, especially like organizations. You'll see who can do the work and who can't, right? Can you make the organization be compliant with at the same time being innovative and growing a business as well? So you have to put your business hat on, the CISO hat on, the startup hat on. When it comes to sustainment and also maintenance, essentially you're taking over a CISO, and they're going to probably go on and go do some cool stuff, and then you, as the up and coming CISO, is going to just sustain operations. A lot of organizations who have hit a certain millions, $100 million, $200 million a year love sustainment. Let's just sustain. If you're in a more heavily regulated area, such as, let's just say, banking, for example, financial sector, heavily regulated. So you might have a dual CISO, right? You might have a global CISO, you might have a deputy CISO, and this CISO is more on compliance. So compliance CISO, which is good. It really depends where you are in the business and the job, but I believe that every categorization of CISO requires a different type of skill set and different type of tenacity.
It was interesting. You're talking about healthcare, which is a heavily regulated industry in the U.S., no question about it. As a CISO, do you find that those regulations are more help or hurdle when you're working with, say, the executive board? Because on the one hand, it seems to me that the regulations require certain minimums that are really non-negotiable.
Yep.
To be in business, you have to do at least this. But on the other hand, it's got to be a little interesting when you recognize that the regulatory requirements aren't at the same level as best practices, and having that conversation. So, do you like the more free form CISO that can come in less regulated industries, or having that framework to build within?
I think understanding the framework that needs to be built in is a good point of reference. However, having a free flowing CISO kind of empowers them to innovatively think of different areas of, like, hey, how can I figure this out without being overly burdened on taxing on frameworks and compliance and whatnot? You bring a very good point in regards to, let's just say, HIPAA and some other regulator frameworks. Prescriptively, they're very good at what their intention is, but sometimes in the spirit of it, they have to be a little bit more malleable and flexible. As a chief information security officer, you're never going to hit all domains. You're just not. You need a team for that, and you need a couple $1 million budget. And I know a lot of hospitals that just don't even, this less than 1% of IT's budget, and that's security, right? And so there has to be some sort of innovational growth, but in the same aspect, these regulators and compliance areas need to be bendable in a good way and malleable, and kind of give and take a little bit, right?
You know, when you were talking about that whole area, it seems to me that security has long had two identities
Mhm.
within the organization. The one is the Department of No. Security is going to be the one telling you that whatever innovative, great, fabulous, profit-making thing you want to do, you can't do because it's insecure.
Yeah.
And the other is that it is a pure cost center.
Yes.
And as a pure cost center, that means that it is to be minimized at every opportunity.
Mm.
Do you end up having to fight those battles as CISO, and how successfully can you fight them?
Yeah, I think if we look at it from a different perspective, right, and we say, instead of being the Department of No, why don't we become the Department of Why Not? And how do we secure around that? I think with artificial intelligence and everything coming this way, we need to figure out how we can play in the playground and allow other people to play in the playground. But at the same aspect, we can establish the rules. It's okay. I think the old school way of, like, beating down the door, you're going to do this, you're going to do it, it's just not going to work nowadays. One, for innovation. Number two, cybersecurity culture is just not the way. The younger generation is just doesn't work that way anymore. So it's just not going to work. And then for progress forward, if you can, as an executive, I constantly hear no. No means no. That means I'm going to move on. So that's going to be a tough one right there.
It is interesting because I have always heard when I've worked with salespeople that no is when the sales effort starts. And so it's interesting the different perspectives that come with that. A lot of organizations, as they are growing, they begin with having an IT group that maybe one person is going to be tasked primarily with security. They're not, for whether through annual revenue turnover or just the number of seats. They don't feel like they can have a dedicated security organization. So as you think about a group that's maybe at that level, how does that evolve? I mean, you've got someone who's probably going to be coming out of an IT mindset, trying to adopt a security mindset. And my first question is, from your experience, are those two different perspectives and mindsets to have?
Good question. So with regards to making it add value, let's look at it from an add value perspective to the business. And one of the questions you asked me was, how do we make this a positivity on the line item budget, not an expense? Think about this. In order for the organization to do business at X, Y, and Z, there's always going to be a requirement for security. Now there's just hard coded contracts and whatnot, right? So we are add value, cost savings, and also and also a profitability contributor to the organization. If security is not here, we will not get the business of X. That's one way of looking at it. Number two, absolutely. I think that if we can pull somebody from the grassroots perspective of an IT, I think a lot of security professionals nowadays lack the IT experience that they need. And IT is like, hey, this is the way it's done. Why not go to security? So if we can marry those, why don't we pull that and make it an expense or like a top line revenue contributor to the organization and view it that way?
You have obviously, over your career, been involved with many, many different projects. Do you find that today most significant projects have security as a consideration from the beginning, or are you still dealing with a lot of situations where the functional and operational requirements will be well down the path before someone thinks to bring in security and start figuring out how that's going to play?
Both. So that's a really good question, right? So number one is when I see newer products coming to the marketplace within the last 2 to 5 years, I see that with a security by design or a privacy by design, somebody has learned a lesson, was like, hey, we should do this to include this. I'm like, perfect. Now let's just go 5 years and past 50 years. It's a little bit more legacy. And they're starting to catch up like, hey, what tools or features or products or people or process can we put as a compensated control to make sure it's secure? So eventually these are going to be legacied out and the new incumbent technology is going to take over. And it's already probably 7 steps or 7 or 8 years ahead of it already with the security by design.
Security by design. I have heard a lot of conversations around that, and I look forward to a day when it is far more widely adopted as a way of making things happen. Um, when you were talking about that, it did make me think a little bit. When you are working in the early stages of a project, um, can you run us through a little bit about how you talk with the stakeholders about security? Because it seems that in many cases, a company, someone will say, "Hey, don't they just have a product to do this? Don't they have a cloud service? They don't. We'll just drop that in, and it will solve our problem." You mentioned all of the other things: the people, the process,
Okay.
the education that has to go on. And do you start with those early on? How does that work as a process for you as the CISO?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, with regards to implementing things as soon as you can at the beginning, because once the thing starts making you money and your operations department has taken it over, moving the wheels in a certain direction is very difficult. So, I would say if you can sit down with your product team, your executive team, and show them, hey, if we do this in a secure way, if we map to this framework, if we have these compensating controls, here's how we can contribute to top line revenue and the progress of business and lowers the risk and threats of our business. And you outline them and you put dollar amounts to them. Generally speaking, I've had a pretty good success, not only with executive leaders, but also department heads and also CFOs. Hey, sir or ma'am, I need money. And here's why. CFOs usually want to spend money, contrary to belief. if it's in the right position, right? If you can say, hey, we're going to avoid a $10 million breach, I just need $500,000, chances are you might get the funding.
One of the things that many CISOs end up going and asking for money for is training the users on not only a new system, but on just existing best practices from a user perspective. Is that something that you find yourself having interesting conversations around? And how important do you see, say, bringing in a third party educator to run through that part of the process and provide certification or ongoing assessment of your users?
So when the business gets to a certain caliber or a certain monetary amount, I'm just gonna throw a number out there, $100 million, right, in revenue. You should be bringing in a third party assessors. You should be bringing in third party. It'll complement the business value and also complement the evaluation of the business, right? Because I look at it from an M&A perspective, a venture capital perspective, and that's kind of the way you kind of assess certain things. And also on top of that, it brings a light off of you. It's like, hey, our external CISO over here said we have these risks things, even though you've been harping it for 5 years, they're going to say, hey, chances are, this is not good. We should definitely address those things. So I think it's very critical to do that. When it comes to training, I believe right now the marketplace has really good and affordable market training. And I really believe that every year, an individual, a cybersecurity professional, me included, has to have at least 3 new things that they learn. And last year, I sat through 3 different CIO and CISO trainings at the university level and also at a certification level, and it's very much needed.
Very good. So definitely not just a one and done as somebody is onboarding and then you do a tick box and you're gone.
Absolutely not. No.
Well, want to come back and talk about the relationships that you have as someone who is managing projects, and as someone who is managing the security um, operations for an organization. Do you find that there are certain members of the executive team that you work with more often than not? And how do you cultivate those relationships from a business perspective?
Yeah, from a business perspective, cultivating the relationship is one, be positive. Number two, always be add value and of service to them. It's pretty simple, but not simple. And the type of organizations and also department heads that I deal with are usually at the ownership level, people who have the purse, CFOs, CEOs, and then usually it's human resources. And also, I find myself in a product management focus area because what we're doing is creating a product in flight. We need to test it, crash test burn. How's it secure? Good to go. And then we're on to the next evolutional part of it, right? So I think a lot of time is being spent around product management and also operational management. How do we fix the things that need to be fixed for more operational efficiency for better top line revenue?
Well, you've been very generous with your time and expertise so far, and I want to take advantage of that for just a few more minutes.
Sure.
And one of the questions I'll ask, if someone is coming up out of the IT ranks in
Yeah.
an organization, what sort of these certifications, classes, courses would you recommend they look seriously at beginning with so that they are better prepared for the CISO role? And I'm going to differentiate that from necessarily the hands-on, I'm going to set up, my firewall rules level of expertise.
Yeah. One, I always say get a different type of skill set that you need. One is going to be get your interpersonal skills well, right? Very well, interpersonal skills, interpeople personal skills, understanding cultural dynamics and also language dynamics as well. And the reason I say that is I have a dear friend of mine, a great guy. He wants to be a CISO and he's super technical and his delivery is very blunt. And it's like, hey, and he just doesn't understand when you're talking to the CEO, you're talking to somebody who's logical. Talking to CEO, that's somebody who's visionary, right? You have to understand the dynamics. Number two would be definitely invest your time in some sort of CISO training, whatever that is, right? Whether it's a formal college or certification, and then also immerse yourself into these CISO communities. There's 5 CISO organizations and communities that I'm in charge of and also a part of here in Nashville and across the United States. And you get to have a no nonsense, no BS conversation with other CISOs. And these CISOs are leading $1 billion organizations to $1 million organizations. So you see everything. Those are some of the things that I would tell somebody coming from the IT side. I understand it's technical, but you need to understand security, but you further need to understand how you can make it a lot better for other people.
I think that making it better for other people is going to be critical for a lot of folks, and in many ways a different way of thinking than they're used to in business. So that I'm fascinated. I'm very pleased to hear you say that's a good layer of things. Now, one of the things I know you do is spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about threats and the risk landscape out there. So, we're getting ready to go as we talk here into 2025. Do you see for CISOs a radically changing risk landscape out there, or do you think it's just going to be 2024 but more?
So 2025 is going to bring a new landscape of threats. One is going to be, let's get our general cyber hygiene, hand-to-hand combat down, the basics, 101, right? Let's just get that. So we're on the same page. We're going to see quite a bit of different things in regards to different threats, such as, let's just say, artificial intelligence. One of the things I would encourage cybersecurity professionals is to lean in a little bit more and embrace the artificial intelligence and use it to your advantageous of how you can automate certain things, right? Whatever that is in your program, whether it's a playbook or whether it's, a run book or whatever it is. And then also implementing some sort of, threat mitigation tool, if you will. If you have those different layers of different attributes, I think you'll be doing amazing things. In 2025, I saw this when I was in Israel. I think we're probably going to see the first publicly facing or forward facing now metamorphic and polymorphic ransomware. So.
Our thanks to Ricoh Danielson, CISO of Virtix Health, for taking the time to talk with me this week. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the Cyber Watch Expert Series, when I'll be bringing you another industry expert with a conversation about what it takes to succeed in cybersecurity. The Cyber Watch Expert Series is brought to you by Access Point Consulting. Follow along with the Cyber Watch Expert Series on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And as always, you can learn more about Access Point Consulting at www.accesspointconsulting.com. I'm Curtis Franklin. We'll see you next week.